I think everybody can agree that you are the underdog in this race. But why, when so many members of Parliament voted for you, do you think you're behind, as it were, with the members of the party? Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, Esther, I think you're right to mention the fact that I was really proud to have topped the ballot in every round of the MP stage of this. And if you think actually not that long ago when people were speculating about whether this leadership contest would happen or not, I wasn't really part of that conversation. So to have ended up in a position where I did top the MP phase is something that I'm really proud of, drawing support from all parts of the parliamentary party, which I think is an important demonstration that I can bring people back together and unite the party afterwards. But look, when it comes to this next phase, I'm out and about across the country. I'm talking to lots of members. I've spoken to a few thousand just in the last couple of days. And I'm getting a really positive reception where I'm going, and I'm enjoying having those conversations with our members. And I think the race is closer than it might appear in the newspapers.
Well, I was going to say that the YouGov, the Con Home would have you behind. So are you going to benefit from the ballot being late going out? Could you come back?
Well, you know, there's no point in me worrying about the process of these things. What I'm focused on is just getting out and about, talking to as many members as I can across the country, as you said, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. It's a real privilege to be able to do that. And I'm talking about what I believe in. I'm talking about my vision of what I can do for the country. And actually, wherever I'm going, I feel that people are open to hearing that message, and I'm making good progress.
Well, thinking about some of the issues that might explain why you're behind in those YouGov polls and Con Home polls, maybe the first one might be tax. Would you accept that even though you don't agree with the policy of cutting taxes straight away, do you agree that that is, with our members, more popular than your stance?
Well, look, I got into this, Philip, and I was keen to be true to myself, true to my beliefs, which I think are conservative beliefs and conservative values. And I appreciate that that's probably not the easiest message for people to hear, but I think it's the right one. And look, we just, recently had a report from the Bank of England, everyone saw it, and the clear and present danger to our economy is inflation. I think that's obvious, and I think the Conservative Party needs to recognise that. And I've been saying for a while that that should be the number one priority of the new Prime Minister and the new government to tackle. And I'm worried about plans that suggest pumping tens of billions of pounds of borrowed money into the economy and be complacent about the risks that might cause to making the inflation problem worse and last longer. So even though it makes my life a little bit more tricky, I think that's the right approach. I think it's the responsible approach. It's the conservative approach. It's what I believe Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson did back then and would do again.
One of the criticisms that people make of your time as Chancellor is that we had the highest burden of taxation in 70 years, something that people would say isn't a very conservative thing, that Tax Freedom Day this year was on the 8th of June, whereas back in the 1990s it was early May. Do you not accept that Conservative members find that kind of thing, that sort of tax burden, a real negative as far as you're concerned?
Gosh, you know what? I find it difficult, Philip. I'm a Conservative Chancellor. I'm a Conservative to my core, and I didn't have to expect to do those difficult things. I didn't particularly relish doing them. Of course I didn't. But I was also the Chancellor that had to deal with a pandemic, right? A once-in-a-century event that knocked us for six, did enormous damage to our economy, our public finances, and there's a job to do to rebuild things afterwards. So yes, I did have to do some difficult things, but we have to remember the context in which I had to do them. And look, as I said, I'm a Conservative to my core. And to me, a big part of that, a way I was raised, what I believe Conservative values are, is not living beyond your means. It's making sure that you are paying for the things that you're spending on. And that's my approach to the economy as well. And I do think it's reasonable that we don't just rack up bills on the country's credit card and then pass them to our kids and our grandkids to pick up. I don't think that's conservative. And right now, given where inflation and interest rates are, I don't think that's responsible either.
Do you accept that we are, as a country, we are overspending rather than the fact that we're undertaxed?
Yes, I do. And look, as Prime Minister, I want to change that. And that starts with accepting and actually making the argument that we as Conservatives believe that government shouldn't do everything, government can't do everything. That's something I said from the dispatch box as Chancellor towards the end of the pandemic. And as Prime Minister, I want to make sure that we make a reality of that. Now, that's what I firmly believe. And going forward, I want to have a government that focuses on doing less, but doing it really well and efficiently. We need to focus on getting value for money out of all the money that we're pumping into public services, starting with the NHS, where we all know, of course, the NHS is a priority, but we all know that there's reform and efficiency that we can get out of it. I've got a plan to do that, because that's how we're going to reduce the size of the state. That's how we're going to be able to cut people's taxes. And that's what my plan is to do.
So the second reason, I guess, why you may be behind in those poll of members is the fact that people feel, many party members feel very loyal still to Boris, and they feel that your resignation precipitated his downfall. Do you understand why so many of those members feel angry with you about that?
Yeah, I completely understand that. And look, it was a really difficult decision for me to make. And Boris is the guy who gave me the job that I love doing, and I'm very grateful to him and always will be that he did that. And it was a real privilege and a pleasure to work very closely alongside him for 2 and a bit years. And I'm proud of all the things that we achieved together. And as I said, I think he's one of the most remarkable people that I've ever met. And he was the only person who could have broken that Brexit gridlock, the only person who could have delivered that unbelievable majority for us. And we should all recognise those achievements. But look, it got to a point where, for me, it was just too difficult to carry on. And that was a combination of economic policy, where he and I clearly had some differences. And it's just not possible for a Chancellor and Prime Minister not to be on the same page when it comes to the economy. And so I've left really with no choice but to go. But also, the government was on the wrong side of another ethical question, and I found that difficult to defend. And ultimately, that's why I made the very personal decision to leave. And look, it's also worth saying that 60 other members of Parliament came to the same conclusion and left independently of me. But look, I was sad to have to go, and I'm sad about how things ended.
Well, there was a feeling, I think, among some people that you plotted to get rid of the Prime Minister, that you struck when the time was right. That's the sort of feeling that people have, that this wasn't just a spontaneous thing, it was a longer decision. I mean, had you thought about resigning at an earlier stage?
No, I mean, categorically, I can tell you and everyone watching, this was an entirely personal decision. I didn't talk to other ministers or MPs about it. It was an entirely personal decision for me. It was a very sad decision. There was no coordination. And then actually, after I did it, I stayed away from Parliament. As you probably remember, I didn't come to Parliament and make a resignation speech the next day. I didn't give any interviews. I stayed away deliberately because I was very sad about what happened. So that was how I did it. And whether people believe that or not, I don't know. But that's God's honest truth. That's how I came to the decision. That's what I did immediately afterwards.
And then there was, I guess, when you got the fixed penalty notice, I mean, I think even your harshest political opponents felt that it was rather unfair that you turned up for a meeting and got a fixed penalty notice. But I guess you could have resigned then. Did you think about resigning then? Why did you not resign then?
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry about that incident, and I'm sorry about the fine. And as you mentioned, kindly, Philip, the reason I was there in the room was there for a COVID meeting, as I was at least once a day, every day, trying to work on things like furlough and getting the country through it. But look, when I got it, I did struggle. I struggled with what to do, and part of me thinking through it was me speaking to the Prime Minister that day, and he was keen for me to stay. And given he had given me the job, and I was grateful to him for that, that meant something to me and carried a lot of weight with me as I thought about what to do and why I ultimately decided to stay.
So moving on to your policies and lockdown and the impact that has had on the country's finances, on the economy as a whole, your reflections on that now?
Well, look, I want to be careful, Esther, because I was part of a government, and I take that seriously. And you've served in government, knew what it's like. And look, when you're in the team, it doesn't mean you agree with every decision, but if you're part of the team, you sign up to that and you stay in government and you defend the decision. So I don't want to sit here and criticise things that the government did, because that's not the right thing to do. That's not the Conservative thing to do. But look, I think it's no great secret that throughout that process, I was keen to try and make sure that all parts of the impact of lockdowns were considered. Because, yes, there was an argument that they could help slow the spread of COVID, but it's very clear, and we learned more over time, that they were also having a significant impact on lots of other things, people's mental health, other health outcomes when people were not getting other treatment, obviously the economy and people's jobs, which long-term impacts their health as well, and notably on our kids and their education. And I was constantly trying to make sure that all those things were taken into account as well. And look, right at the end, I was away on a government trip abroad last Christmas. I flew back home deliberately to make sure that I could make the argument strongly that this country did not go into another lockdown because of Omicron. And we really were sleepwalking in that direction at that moment. We were hours away from a press conference that was about to announce it. And I led the charge with a couple of others and saying, no, this would be a mistake for our country. The data didn't support it. We could just wait to see what was happening in South Africa. And I'm really glad I did. It wasn't an easy thing to do because the entire kind of establishment was saying we got to lock down. But I'm glad I stood up to them. I'm glad I made the argument that was the wrong thing to do, and I'm glad that was ultimately vindicated.
So if you became Prime Minister, can you say you wouldn't blanket lockdown again for another COVID-type pandemic?
I think it would be wrong for anyone to sit here, Esther, and say that they can never rule out in all circumstances. But I think people have seen my record over the last couple of years and what I did in December with Omicron. For me, the bar is very high because I think there's lots of things that you need to take into account in those decisions.
Okay, I'm going to repeat this question again. A blanket lockdown for a COVID-type pandemic. Can you say yes or no, you would or wouldn't lock down again?
Well, I think a blanket lockdown in the way we did it before clearly was far too blunt an instrument, as we discovered, and we learned as we went along that there wasn't the need for that type of blanket lockdown, and that's why over time we could find different ways to deal with this. And actually for COVID, now we have vaccines and new antiviral treatments. It would seem to me highly unlikely that you would ever need to do a lockdown for a COVID-type pandemic, because we already now have the protections which mean that it wouldn't be necessary to stop something very bad happening, because we've got a bunch of protections now against COVID. So it seems to me highly, highly unlikely that you would ever need to do something like that.
One of the issues that many of our viewers have exercised about is the illegal immigration, the dinghies coming over from France. So what steps would you take to try and sort that out once and for all?
Yeah, look, it vexes me as well. And part of the reason that I supported Brexit, even though I was told that it would be potentially damaging for my career, but I believed in it. And one of the reasons was clearly making sure that we had proper control of our borders. And so what everyone's seeing on their TV screens now, where thousands of people are coming illegally to this country in small boats, is just wrong. And we've got to stop it. Now, for anyone who's interested, I've set out a detailed 10-point plan with a video on my website, so please go and have a look at that later today if you've got a chance. But I'll give you a couple of things that I'm prepared to do quite quickly. One of them is we've got to change the definition of asylum. At the moment, we use the ECHR, the European definition, and that is very broad. It's become broader over time. It's exploited by lefty lawyers for lots of spurious reasons to keep people here. So I think we should move to a different definition, another international standard that Australians and others use, which is much tighter and narrower, so that will help. Another idea is actually we need to be tougher with our foreign policy, because at the moment we'll talk to a country about a trade deal that we're happy to give them. Indeed, we'll talk to them about some aid that we might be sending them, but at the same time we're not saying, hang on, you also need to agree to take back all your failed asylum seekers. So we've got to be a bit more joined up on that and a bit tougher about this. But look, I want everyone watching to be in absolutely no doubt. I will grip this situation. The plan I've set out is radical. I will do whatever it takes, including any legal changes, to make the Rwanda policy work, because we must have control over our borders.
So when you say you'll take any steps that are needed to do it, if we had to leave the European Convention of Human Rights, would you be prepared to do that?
No option should be off the table. I think the first thing should be to crack on with our British Bill of Rights. My idea to change the definition of asylum that we use will also help. That's a new legal change. But look, if that's not sufficient and we're still getting frustrated by lefty lawyers, then no option should be off the table, because we must have control over our borders. Any sovereign country must be able to do that.
Now, you made a policy this week about tackling extremism and wanting to do more about that. I just wondered whether or not that would include doing more to tackle some of the grooming gangs that we see in our towns and cities across the country, Telford, Rotherham, Bradford, where my constituency is. What can you say to people in those areas about what you do to try and make sure that we clamp down more on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I have two young girls who are 9 and 11, and I think for too long we just haven't focused on this issue, Philip. And it's a horrific crime that is affecting actually not just girls in a few places, it's far more pervasive across the country than actually we all realise. And we all know the reason that people don't focus on it. It's because of political correctness, and they're scared of calling out the fact that there's a particular group of people who are perpetuating these crimes. And I think that's wrong. And I want to change that as Prime Minister. So what I've said is we'll have a new task force at the National Crime Agency that's focused on this. We will have a requirement for police forces everywhere to prioritise this. I want to make sure that all police forces record the ethnicity of those involved, which currently is not done because people don't want to do that. And I want to create a brand new life sentence for those involved in grooming with very limited options for parole, because I'm not going to let political correctness stand in the way of tackling this absolutely horrific crime. I want to call it out for what it is, and I want to tackle it properly, because when you read about it, it's awful. And I have two young girls and I feel this very personally, but a Conservative government should be not letting political correctness stand in the way of keeping people safe, and that's what I want to do.
Moving on to the NHS and the backlogs in the NHS and people having a difficulty either getting to see an NHS dentist or getting an appointment with a GP. How will you tackle that?
Yeah. Look, everyone relies on the NHS, and I come from an NHS family. That's what I grew up in. I saw it firsthand. And that's why I did something difficult, to put some more money into the NHS and social care to try and help fix some of the problems, recover from the pandemic. But look, as Conservatives, we can't just keep throwing money at things. We've got to focus on getting value for money, getting reform and efficiency in the system. And that's why I've set out quite a bold plan to do that. And look, one of those ideas I've got is to tackle this issue of missed appointments. Now, over 10 million appointments every year are missed, not just with GPs, but with hospital doctors. And that's not right, because it's depriving people of care that they desperately need. And I'm prepared to be tough on that and actually say, well, we should charge people and it shouldn't be acceptable to do that. And that's not about raising money. We're doing that to change behaviour. Because if people cancel their appointments in advance properly, then that suddenly creates lots more capacity in the system so that we can get the backlogs down quicker, get people the treatment they need, and none of us have had to spend a penny more. Now that's the kind of slightly bold but radical thinking we need if we're going to get a grip of this. Now, of course, we can use more technology, we can take out lots of the managers that are there, we can call out bad leadership and make sure we change it when it's not performing, we can do elective surgery in a different way, learning from the private sector is one of my other ideas. But look, if we're not going to be prepared to be bold and confront this, it's just going to gobble up every pound that taxpayers have, and we'll never be able to cut taxes. And I want to cut taxes, but a prerequisite of us doing that is getting a grip of public spending, and that means reforming the NHS.
People would look at you and say competent, they'd say disciplined, they'd say diligent, but get tough, can you?
Well, look at my track record. When it came to Brexit, the easy thing for me to do would have just follow the herd, do what was safe for my career and just back Remain. I didn't do that, right? I stood up to the quote-unquote establishment and I said, no, I'm going to go with my principles. I believe in Britain, I believe in Brexit, and I'm going to back it. And if that's the end of my career, so be it. When it came to Omicron, right? The easy thing to do would have just been to keep quiet because the entire establishment was prepared to just go along with it. I had to be tough to say no. I had to say no to everybody. You're wrong. Look at the data. We don't have to do this. Right? And then, whether it's illegal migration, as we've been talking about, whether it's grooming gangs, those are not easy things. Whether it's saying we're going to actually find people who miss NHS appointments. I'm prepared to do things differently and boldly because I think that's how you get change in life, right? And that's what my record has been. And you saw that in the pandemic, right? No one had heard of furlough, and I was confronted with this enormous challenge. I ripped up the rule book, right? I changed convention. I created something that didn't exist in a matter of weeks, which worked. And I'm going to bring that same degree of radicalism, competence and grip to tackling all the problems we face.
A quick question here. HS2 or high-speed broadband? Which one?
Well, look, we're doing both. We're doing both.
Oh, you've lost me there.
Well, we are doing both. We are doing both.
Yeah, well, okay.
But look,
You've lost me.
I'm someone who believes in the future, right? So if you think, what do I think is more important? I think the digital economy is incredibly important.
Okay,
right?
you're getting me back.
There we go. But look, the other thing I'd say, the digital economy is important, and it's not just about broadband. It's about actually mobile phone signal in rural areas. That's something that is really important to me, and I help fund as Chancellor, because that's how you spread opportunity in a 21st century economy. It's how you grow the economy. And I also think we need to move away from focusing only on very large-scale infrastructure projects.
Right, well, the first one is HS2. Move away from that and save yourself some money.
Well, that's why I focused as Chancellor on promoting smaller scale projects in towns and communities up and down the country. I created the Levelling Up Fund because that's the kind of thing where you can spend smaller amounts of money that make an immediate difference to people's lives in their communities across the country. And that's my definition of levelling up. It's about spreading opportunity and making sure people have pride in the place they call home. I don't want them to wait, 3 decades for this massive new train to come. I want them to get it in the next year or two so they can see real change, and preferably before the next election. That's the kind of thing that I want to deliver.
It's across the north and not the HS2. I'm leaving that thought with you.
Yeah.
Was Nancy Pelosi right to go to Taiwan?
Yeah, of course she has the right to go to Taiwan, and her visit can absolutely not be an excuse for China to then behave in the way that it has and aggressively start doing manoeuvres in the Taiwan Straits. That's just obviously not acceptable, and we should be robust in standing up for the values that we believe in democratic freedom and sovereignty of nations, and making sure that people do not suffer unnecessary aggression. And I think we will do that with our allies, particularly in that region. We have a new defence partnership with Australia and America, which our aircraft carrier has been over there. And so that's the kind of thing that we'll do. We have to be robust against defending it, not just over there, by the way, but here at home, which is why, as Chancellor, I was pleased that I passed a new law which gives us the powers to stop hostile states from infiltrating our companies, stealing our technology, so we could protect ourselves against that. That was something that was important to me, and I passed a law to give us the powers to do that. And as Prime Minister, I definitely will use them to keep us all safe.
Now, this week, the Bank of England have increased interest rates. Lots of families will be worried about their mortgage payments. People are worried about their energy bills, things like that. What do you say to people who say, look, your family's incredibly wealthy. You don't understand how hard it is for people and how hard the hardship they're going through at the moment and how difficult it is. What do you say to people who say you're out of touch, in effect, because of your own circumstances?
Yeah. So I've been out and about across the country, right, over the last week or two, talking to members of the public everywhere. And I've had so many people come and talk to me about furlough. And they've come and talked to me about what it did, what it meant to them, how it saved their job, helped their family, how their business was supported, and they wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the things I did. And they were grateful for that. And they all remember that first press conference I did as Chancellor, where I kind of arrived and people didn't quite know who I was. And then I did these things that really helped them at a time when they were really worried. And I was reflecting, and when I gave that press conference, I was wearing the same suit that I'm wearing today that now attracts a lot of commentary, right? I'm the same person who did all those things. And I think in this country, we judge people by their character and their actions, not by what's in their bank account or what they're wearing. And ultimately, I've always acted over the past couple of years to protect people, particularly the most vulnerable in society, through difficult times. That's what I did as Chancellor. Of course, that's what I'm going to do as Prime Minister. I feel that very personally. And look, I'm fortunate today, but that's not how I grew up. My grandparents emigrated here 60 years ago. They didn't have a lot, but they built a better life for themselves. My parents worked their socks off to provide a better life for their 3 children. Those are the values that I was raised with. It was about hard work, it was about family, it was about aspiration. Those are entirely conservative values. Those are the values that I want to champion. And it's because of that I want to be Prime Minister, because I want to make sure that everyone has the same opportunities that I did. And as Prime Minister, I want to deliver that.
Now, your family's been in the eye of the media storm. Your wife got lots of criticism about being a non-dom. Did you feel that was a legitimate criticism for people to make, or did you feel it was unfair that your wife was dragged into the political melee?
Look, thinking back on that is, look, obviously it was difficult, but reflecting on it, you learn from those experiences, and to your point, it's what I recognised is, whether I like it or not, at this level, your family is exposed to that. And, difficult as that is, uncomfortable it is, because they're the people you love and, they're not the ones who chose to do this. But look, that's the way it is, right? And that's fair, and I accept that. And I've learned from that experience as a result.
And if you become Prime Minister, of course, that media spotlight would be even worse, presumably, on your family. I mean, are they ready for that?
Yes, and that actually, as I said, having learned from the experience over Easter, it's something that I'm much more prepared for, and I completely accept the scrutiny that comes, and I completely think that I can see why that's there, and difficult as it was at the time, because as I said, it's the people you love, you want to protect them, and they're not the ones who chose to do this. It's completely understandable that that's part of the process at this level, and I said I've learned from that experience, as have they.
And so growing up, I'm just thinking, were your parents political? Did they sort of bring out this in you? Were they conservatives?
We did. They were just too busy working. It wasn't time for that, to be honest.
So where did your love come from? And when did you first think, I want to be Prime Minister?
Oh gosh. So funny enough now, because all these journalists are digging up these articles I would write in my school newspaper when I was a teenager, kind of railing against Tony Blair and the European integration project. So I was prescient about that as a very annoying 17-year-old. So that's clearly there because they found all these articles. So look, I think for me it was about values. Why did I become a Conservative? It was probably because I just got the sense that for a family like ours, where my parents were working. I mean, my mum ran a local chemist in Southampton. I worked in her shop the whole time. That's how I grew up. My dad
slave labour.
Well, no. She did pay me as well. But that's a family business, right? That's what you do. And I just got the sense that it was a Conservative government that was on the side of people like my parents, right? That was a family who was prepared to work really hard because they wanted to build a better future for their kids. And it just kind of felt like those values were the values of the Conservative Party, and that, even though we didn't talk about it, that was the kind of thing that I was brought up with. And then look, obviously, I grew up, and I was really inspired by my parents actually, because my mum was a chemist, my dad was a GP, and when I was out delivering medicines for my mum and to people who couldn't come and pick them up, they would always talk to me. They'd say, "Oh, you're Dr. Sunak's son, you're Mrs. Sunak's son," and then they would tell me some story about my parents. And I thought that was amazing, that they could have such an impact on the community that we grew up in. And that was my inspiration for wanting to be an MP.
So they must be really proud. And along your journey, obviously you became Chancellor, but that was with a shock resignation, in a way, by Sajid Javid. Did that put strains and tensions on your relationship with him?
I think so. Obviously, look, that was his own thing, and he and I have worked together in different departments, so we've known each other for a while. And I don't think any particular thing. I mean, I've hung out with him subsequently and without any problem. And then we worked together when he came back to cabinet as health secretary. In fact, he was standing there alongside the Prime Minister and I when we announced the new levy to fund health and social care, which was, I know, important to him at the time too, because he wanted to make sure we got extra funding into the NHS and social care, and we were all three there doing that together.
We all know what Thatcherism is. How would you define Sunakism?
Well, I think it's probably a bit early, Philip, to put myself in that kind of pantheon, and that's probably a high aspiration. But look, my conservatism is based on my values. And what are my values? My values are patriotism, because I'm so enormously grateful to this country, our country, for what it did for my family by welcoming them here as immigrants. It's about family, which is core to everything I am, and family, the bonds of family are incredibly important, far more important than what governments do. And it's about hard work and aspiration, right? Those are my values. That's the type of conservatism that I want to champion, a type of conservatism that rewards those values, that builds an economy and a society that supports those values.
And finally, look, we've discussed that your family is very wealthy. Lots of people will say, I think I'm included in this perhaps, you don't need to do this, you don't need to go through all this grief, you don't need to go all this charging about everywhere.
I said this, I think William Hague said this as well.
I think he might have said
what's
this.
he doing it for? That we supported you, I know that much.
I guess, some people say, look, he could just sit on a yacht sunning himself for the rest of his life. So Why are you putting yourself through all of this?
Yeah. Actually, funny, you mentioned William Hague. I say, you know, growing up, you talk about politics. You know, people like William were political heroes of mine, and Nigel Lawson. And to have them be supportive of me now is incredibly humbling, actually. And it's a kind of pinch yourself type moment in this campaign when your political heroes are now helping support you in this endeavour, which is really lovely. Look, why am I doing it? I'm doing it for a simple reason, and that's because I love our country to bits. Our country did this extraordinary thing for my family and welcomed them here, allowed them to build a better life for themselves and their children. And that's why I want to be Prime Minister, because I want to do that for everyone. I want everyone's kids and grandkids to be able to have the same amazing opportunities that I had. I think my plan is the right one to lead us into that future, to build a country and a society built on those values of family and aspiration and hard work and hope. And I think I'm the right person to do it, and the right person to then go and smash Keir Starmer in the next election.
Do you know what that sounds to me? Payback time. Look, Rishi, thank you very much indeed for sitting down with us today and being so honest on your answers there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you both.